On the Road of Recovery with Jessica from Kent. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Thanks so much for coming out and joining us. Can you start off by describing your childhood?
So I had a really, a pretty good childhood, pretty joyful childhood. Although my parents did separate at an early age, and I feel like there was a little trauma around that. I really don't remember them living together very much. Like my very earliest memories, I remember my father being in the house.
Okay.
But for the most part, they were always kind of separated.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up with my brother. I had an older brother. And so we kind of split time. Most of the time with my mom and spent weekends with my father. My dad was a trucker, so we got to do a lot of traveling in the truck, which was pretty
cool.
fun.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. So I had a generally good childhood. Like I said, some trauma, and a lot of that I've worked through, you know what I mean, at this point. So I guess bringing it up doesn't seem to impact me the way it once did.
Right.
But I do know it impacted me on my journey. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let's talk about, when did you first start experimenting with alcohol or drugs?
So I started getting into that about 14 or 15, and it really accelerated pretty quickly. It was drinking and smoking pot, and that was like pretty regular behavior. It started with weekends, and then it was like throughout the school days. And then, I kind of gravitated towards artistic and musical people. And I lived in a college town, in Kent, Ohio is a college town. And so the local cafe was a mix of people, and there were people, it didn't matter what age you were. You could be 14, 15, 16 years old, college age, 40, 30. Right. They were all people just kind of congregated together. So it wasn't very tough to find substances, It didn't take too long before an older guy was like, hey, I have lots of weed, and you could sell it at school or whatever. You know what I mean? I'll hook you up with this much. You bring this much money back. And it was an opportunity for me. So this kind of gave me that social capital that
you're looking for it. Yeah.
Right. I'm where the party is, and people need to it gave me some power and control, which I think, at the base of what a lot of us struggle with. We want to have more of that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when that opportunity presented itself, I took it, and I became a pot dealer pretty much at like 15 years old. A lot of my friends were wise and got jobs, and I worked a few jobs. I had an after school job as like a busser at a restaurant and stuff like that, but that was a lot better money and a lot faster, and it brought the party to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
And things progressed. You know what I mean? Especially the drinking. The drinking was like daily by the time I was like a junior in high school. First of all, it was giving me, additional social capital. All the kids wanted to party. I could get booze. I could get drugs. And then the desire to get outside of myself and to that quick fix. Yes. You know what I mean? I feel better immediately. I don't feel uncomfortable. I don't feel weird. I don't feel like a spaz. And I've always been called a spaz. I don't know why. But so that kind of took me into that space where, I was kind of living this double life, and things got pretty hairy. I got in some trouble already, like by the time I was in high school, and my, educational life kind of started to suffer. Okay. And I ended up, being a high school dropout. I was forced to retire early, I would say, because I had missed too many days of school. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Because of the fact that I was too busy partying. My drug use got even more intense. And I went to stay with my dad. And for a period of time, getting close with my dad was really helpful for me, and I was making a lot of progress. But then I started making connects in the Akron area. Okay. That were like in this whole other world of like really hard drug use. So there was a lot of meth. And, it wasn't just the psychedelics and the occasional cocaine. It was like, crystal meth on a regular basis every night. There were tweaker houses, and I was in them. You know what I mean? And really delved into that raver scene. So the next thing you know, I was part of a robbery plot. So I was 20 years old, and I had started seeing a a young kid from the area. And he and his friend, I was working at a convenience store, he and his friend and I were rolling on ecstasy. And I was working at a gas station. And I was like, I hatched a robbery plan rolling that wasn't really serious, but I was like, the alarm on this side, and I went into detail about how this is how you would do it because the alarm on this side doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. So one night, the gentleman decided to do it, and we had gone to a rave party the night before, so we were kind of living this lifestyle of like, and again, I'm 20 years old, and I had really, just like I said, hit that slope and was like, whoosh, drug life. I was just drugs all the time. It was every night I was doing hard drugs. So I hit hard and I hit fast. So we went to a rave party one night, and I had to work all by myself on Thanksgiving at the gas station the next day, second shift. And back then, nothing was open except for gas stations on Thanksgiving, and there's football, right? So I couldn't believe they staffed me alone, but I was pretty good at, my job there. So, I guess they just figured I could handle it. But I have like a line out the door. I'm stocking beer coolers because the beer's selling out because it's football. Mm-hmm. I'm, lottery, and I'm one person trying to manage this whole shift. And I had been up all night at a rave. So I keep, the guys that I was with, I'm like, hey, they keep calling me, asking me if the store's empty because they're supposed to be bringing me some speed to help me
get through the day,
handle this, right. Get through the day, right? Yeah. And they keep calling, asking if the store's empty. And I'm like, who cares, dude? Like, just get in here. Like, right. I need some SHIT to get through this shift. And, I'm waiting. I'm just like, oh my gosh, sweating. I'm not keeping up very well. So it looked really bad for me when they came in with hoods on and robbed me. And I immediately knew that it was them, but then it was weird. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, holy crap. Like, I kind of told them to do this, but I didn't know they were really going to do this. Right. You know what I mean? So it was a mix of like shock and like, what do I do? Right. So they robbed the store. And I'm just kind of like, what are you guys doing? And like the guy who was seeing me holds the gun at my butt. So it's real obvious that like he's afraid to hold a gun in my face, stuff like that. But the problem with it was that I didn't have time to make all the drops that I would normally make because I was so busy. So it just made me look really good. Then they had been calling me all night to find out if the store was open. Yeah. Right. So it made me look like I was just totally 100. I was in on it, but not like that. Right. So it just looked so bad for me. So when the police caught up with me, I was like, man, I'm going to jail, And I think like one of them might have said, like, try to blame it all on me or something like that, And I had been taught by the elders, when I first was 15 years old, and that guy taught me, gave me pot to sell. He told me that, never tell the police anything and blah, blah, blah. And, the police trick bag and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, I'm not going to tell the police anything. And they were pushing me, and I was like, well, I might have thought it was them. Like, I don't know. I'm scared to death. They have no idea what to do. So they're like, yeah, we're going to arrest you for, conspiracy to commit robbery and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh no. So I, long story short, my parents didn't think I would need an attorney because it was like my first time being in, real trouble. I had like a couple of underage drinking or whatever tickets, but nothing too serious. And so they didn't hire an attorney for me. They just let the court-appointed attorney, and they figured he would be able to get me probation or whatever. He was actually offered by the judge a diversion program, which might have been like really good for me, but he decided because of my wildness that on my behalf, actually, that I wouldn't be able to handle a diversion program. Well, they're going to hang all these years over her head, and she won't be able to complete the diversion program, so I'm not going to accept that offer. Like, we'll see if we can just get her probation. Right. And didn't even offer me that, so I had a terrible attorney. So I ended up getting a year in prison at 20 years old.
Wow. Okay.
Which isn't as bad as it could have been, right? A year is like, considering the charges, they dropped it down a level a bit. Yeah. So I ended up, being a felon at 20 years old, my options looked really limited after that.
Right.
So that kind of shaped the way my whole 20s went. You know, I still gravitated towards the music, so I had a band, but you know, I explored, of course, obtained my GED, which I did that in prison, which was, thank you, prison.
Right.
Yeah.
At
least it sat me down to like accomplish a couple of things. But, you know, I carried on. You know, at first I thought, oh, I'm going to try and, you know, behave myself a little bit. And I stayed out of trouble for the most part, but I continued to drink. And, you know, the drugs came right back into the picture in not too long. And my whole entire 20s was, you know what I mean? I managed to avoid a lot of the consequences. I ended up in jail a couple times behind OVIs, and that would connect me with IOP. So I ended up going to IOP, I think, 7 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I knew IOP like the back of my hand. I went to IOP in Akron. I went to IOP like a bunch of times in Portage County at Town Hall 2. And, you know, I think seeds were being planted, you know what I mean? But I was just, you know, there wasn't that real belief, you know what I mean? And I was othered. And I think people in my family kind of othered me too, because, you know, you're not like them because stigma, right? Like there's this idea of what that looks like.
Right. And yet every time you get in trouble, there's some type of alcohol.
Every time. Every time. Yes. Absolutely. All of my consequences in my life. Fighting with partners, like knockdown, drag out fighting every time under the influence. Every self-deprecating thing I've done, every band that didn't work out, every, you know, opportunity I didn't take, not going back to college, you know, that was all that. That was all because I was too busy drinking and using, you know. And a lot of that was my beliefs about myself. I was a felon at 20, and I had bought into this in high school, right? When we talked about when that started, I owned the image. I embedded it in my identity. Drug culture. I was a drug person. I mean, like, people would call me the drug fairy, you know, and that kind of gave, like you said, and I said, just that power and control. And then it graduated, you know, I got into my 20s. I started selling anything that I used, you know, and it was a very strange time. So my father died when I was 26.
Sorry.
And I think, thank you. I think that it hit me really hard. We were really close. And especially in my 20s, he was kind of taking me under his wing. And he got sick and died very quickly. Like, I moved in with him to take care of him. And, you know, he had stage 4 lung cancer. Plus he already had some other health issues. He was diabetic and, had heart disease. So like the lung cancer, when that hit, all the other issues became unmanageable.
Right.
So it was within 6 months, and it was like his brother got sick and got a brain tumor and died like 2 weeks before him. So it was just like a lot of loss, right? Yeah. At this one time in my life. At a time where it was almost like I was starting to get into a better space. I was like this close, you know? I hadn't been using the meth as much, and, you know, I was still drinking, but I was like, you know, but then the trauma from that, you know, how do I know how to cope with this? Right. How do I know how to feel better? We know, we know this is what we've always done. So I had some friends that were using opiates, and that's when I got into opiates. I never had been an intravenous user before, but it got to that.
So let's talk then. Once you got into, so you started the IV drug use, how long did that take before you decided I want something different?
Well, it was a couple years in.
Okay.
I was really fortunate because my best friend was working in Brooklyn at a homeless support space, and they offered harm reduction. And he found out that I was using, you know, heroin, and I think he was really upset with me. You know, we were very close. We played music together. You know, I helped him. You know, I gave him the money to go make it big in New York and all that stuff. But he came with harm reduction resources. So he brought me Narcan, and back then it was like the big needle. But he showed me how to use Narcan. He told me, make sure that like when one of us is using, the other one's watching. He taught me how to clean needles, how to bleach them out. He was like, if you're going to do this, you're not going to die on my watch. And that meant a lot to me. It really did.
Right.
And when I was at a point, a couple years in, after I'd been, I was so sick. I was not myself. I didn't, it was just terrible panic attacks, everything. I would, it was just sheer exhaustion. This was just not the life I wanted. He was the one who I contacted. Of course, I had tried some of the local resources at that time. Heroin addiction wasn't something that was as widespread as it is now. This was back in 2010. So they were like, we might be able to get you a bed at the detox. And it was like, I had known other people who went to detox. They go there for 7 days and then they're fixed.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then they might go for another IOP. So I called him to see if he could get me some help. But in the meantime, we were selling heroin to support our habit. So in the meantime of him trying to like find resources for me in our area from New York, which, it sounds a little weird, but it was like the only thing I knew to do because the places that I knew to call weren't able to help me. So in that time I got arrested. And I think there was still part of me that wasn't ready. But there were a couple things that happened that were really profound during that time. One was I was on the jail bus and my co-defendant, who was the boy I was seeing at the time, I told him, this is the lifestyle that we've chosen. Like, we want to party, we want to, we want to hustle, we want to sell drugs. Like, this is that life. Right. If we want that life, we have to accept this. We're going to go to jail. Right. We're going to go to jail sometimes, and we have to live with that. Like, it is what it is. That's what this life is about. And I was totally fine with that when I told him that. He was a little younger than me, and I was like, so get used to it. Learn how to do time. And, I'm acting like I'm so hardcore. And I got back to my jail room, and I was like, no. Like, I heard that back in my head, and I was like, who am I? Like, I just said it out loud, and I don't agree. I disagree. I don't want this. So that was, like, when that kind of, like, light switch went off. And, like, all the seeds that had been planted in different AA meetings and IOPs and stuff like that started to kind of bud, right? Where I'm starting to hear some things in my mind that, like, make sense. Fast forward, I get sentenced. I go, I do another IOP just for funsies. And I had a really great counselor, Cheryl, who she actually is out at a different organization. And she was, for a couple of years, a colleague of mine. I was able to work with her when I worked with the agency that she works for. And she was a really wonderful counselor. And I felt like she really helped me before I went into prison to kind of like, help me get the most out of what I was doing and shift my perspective. I think at that point I had her before for IOP, funnily enough. It wasn't the first time I had her for IOP, but some of the things that she had said to me, really took root in that last, the outpatient program. So I went to prison and I was sentenced to 3 years. But the judge said, if you're really good, you can get out in 6 months. So I found out that I was eligible because of a weird thing, because it was my second time going to prison. 2 times going to prison, and I still was like, I'm not sure if I'm ready for it. Do I need recovery? I don't think I have a problem. But I did the prison time, and I find out that I'm eligible for the boot camp program, which is, it's an intensive prison program, but it's essentially like boot camp in prison. The sergeant at the boot camp program, I was like, I'm gonna get the most out of this. I'm gonna try and get something out of this. The sergeant told me that the program's too easy for me. This is too easy for you, Britney Spears, and I'm gonna make you a squad leader. So overnight, I have no friends. Like,
right?
Nobody wants. No,
yeah.
Right. The women in prison, you're now a police officer, and everyone hates you. My bunkie was like somewhat nice to me. Thanks, Shannon. Then when that happened, I was like, I'm going to do the best at this that I can. I was in this space of like, let me just try to do a good job at something. Like, let me just try. So I did the best I could. I would hold like extra exercise for like the new women who were coming in to like show them how hard the workouts were so they wouldn't be like so beat down when the sergeant was making them do it. It showed me something about myself. I was like, wow, like I have potential. I have leadership potential. I have skills. Like I exerted myself physically in ways I never thought possible. So it was very eye-opening for me, and that was kind of like the game changer. You know, when I came out of that experience, I decided I wanted to have a different life. You know, it wasn't exactly perfect. There was a little like, oh, maybe I can drink, and, you know, went through that, but I ended up kind of pursuing the cognitive behavioral therapy. I liked I have a little psychology education under my belt at Kent State. So I knew a little bit about how behavior modification could be helpful. And I was like, let me do some actual CBT with a counselor. So I really worked on my beliefs about myself, my beliefs about my interactions with the world. So that counseling really helped me. And then, you know, I got into some recovery community stuff, and that really helped me until I got pregnant. I had my first son, and it was a C-section. And
they give you pain medication.
And they give you pain medication. So that was a relapse. And
because you didn't take the pain medication as prescribed.
Right. Well, as soon as they gave me like the take-home pain medication, it was my brain. You know, it was like, it was awakened. And it was funny because I had gone to that same hospital saying, I'm an IV heroin user. I would have assumed it was in my chart. Like, I didn't specifically say, like, hey guys, I'm an addict because, you know, I didn't want to embarrass my mom or whatever. But like, I knew it had to have been in my chart because I had come in there, like having abscesses and like telling them every time I shoot up, I get a panic attack. What's that about? You know what I mean? So I didn't think much. I figured, you know, whatever they were doing for me, they had to do an emergency C-section. I figured whatever they were doing for me was what, you know, was going to be okay. And as soon as I got the prescription, it was like, and then I took it and I took extra most likely, but then I felt like I needed it to be like, I'm a new mom. I was a mom for the first time in my life. My son was struggling to latch. Like, we had all these issues with him feeding. I had a doctor that was like, don't give him a bottle or he'll, you know, it's the worst thing in the world. So like, he ended up in the NICU for like failure to thrive because they wouldn't let me give him a bottle. It was just all this stress and all this, you know, adjustment. And I'm someone who always thought, you know, I had that belief that I needed something outside of myself, and that just came back. That came right back. So I, you know, picked up opiates again, and I was really fortunate that it was only pain pills. And I know this is only pain pills. It's still the same thing. But I wasn't injecting again. And I had like kind of made this rule for myself that like, I'm just going to get, you know, and it was the same thing, Oxys, Roxys, Percocets, but I'm just going to get it from like locally and, you know, yada, yada. And this is going to help me be a good mom. Right. But I was really fortunate in that I had gained enough recovery capital in the time that I had sober, to have a lot to lose. I had, you know, a husband, a home, a child, you know what I mean? A really good life. And people trusted me again, you know, and I'm over here like buying pills and, you know, thinking that I really need this to be who I am. So that was the point when, you know, my consideration was, well, and I was spending money, like, I had an account that had my dad's inheritance, and I was like draining that, and I was like lying, you know, and I knew like it was going to be all bad. So that was the point when it was like I had a choice to make. And at this point my friends had already been dying of overdoses. And that also that was the, you know, one of the reasons that I wasn't like really gravitating towards the straight heroin. And I had already kind of started working with Ohio Can with the harm reduction stuff. Or just a little bit. That was like the very beginning of that. And so my options were, I'm going to call my old dude in Cleveland, my old guy that I would buy weight off of, and I'm just going to get like a quarter ounce and make it last, right? Like, I'm just going to make that last because I'm spending way too much on these pills. Like, my brain literally said that. But then again, that recovery capital piece of like, I have everything to lose if I do that. Like, and there was a doctor, an MAT doctor. So, those were the options in front of me. And I was like, you know what? Like, I've kind of stumbled in this early piece of my recovery. Let me see if, and at that point I was, physically dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, let me see if this MAT is right for me. So they put me on an appropriate dosage. I never once got high on it. That's the thing that everybody, you get high on it. No.
Right.
If
you're on the right dose, taking it at the right time, you're not going to be.
You're not going to be. So, and that really was, it was wonderful for me. The problem was when I went back to I had 2 home groups, AA home groups from like the past. And when I went back to one of them, there were a bunch of people sitting out on the little stoop. And the first thing I heard coming in the door, and this was like my first meeting back after not having been to meetings for a while. And I was like, oh, yay, this is great. This will be nice. Was, those people on Suboxone, they don't belong in recovery. They're not in recovery. I don't even see why they have a sober date. Like, they don't fit in. They don't belong here. Just all the gamut of, they're not out in the back of the room and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, and I'm like, I can't be honest here. And I don't know if I belong here anymore. So it was hard, and and then I had the questions like, am I in recovery? Like, maybe I'm not. So it was really tough until I started educating myself. And that really helped a lot. And I realized that, I was kind of visiting different like recovery spaces in my area. I realized there weren't a lot of not stigmatized spaces for recovery community in our area. Which I did end up finding Smart Recovery online, which was really helpful for me because it kind of pulled those. And, I had done 12-step programming. And a lot of the concepts are similar. There's just but some of the stuff that was different about SMART, like they took away that all or nothing thinking that we were talking about, where if you pick up a substance and use it, like that was one setback. That did not start my whole recovery over. Right. You know what I mean? Like that concept was so liberating to me. And it was like, then that was the last time I ever picked up. And it was okay. You know what I mean? But had I... and then I could look at it like, well, my recovery started, 4 years ago or whatever, several years ago in 2010. And, I've used, this many times where I had this many slip-ups. I had 1 slip-up since then. You know what I mean? I had 1 relapse in this period of time. You know what I mean? And I was being able to own that and be like, but the progress I made wasn't lost. That was super helpful for me. And then just being able to find recovery support. So, just in any spaces. So I ended up going back to school. I ended up, Smart Recovery, that space. There were plenty of people in like NA and stuff like that who are super cool and supportive. So I just kind of like connected with the people who supported me. I went back to school. I joined Collegiate Recovery Community. And, I was doing all that work in harm reduction, which just sort of led into like me becoming a peer supporter. And it all kind of played in together. You know what I mean? It was just like my path had opened up. And for a long time, I was very secretive about MAT, about even just recovery in general. I would advocate for people on MAT, but I would never admit that I was on MAT because I just didn't want anyone to, because I heard what they said. Right. You know what I mean? In Smart Recovery meetings, I was like a little more cool about talking about it. But like never in the groups of people I knew who, like my friends who are 12-step people. And I still face stigma about it to this day. I direct our county's first like recovery community center. It's been a huge, like I've come from prison to, peer support to, went back to school, family, all the success. Recovery's given me everything. Everything. I have a beautiful family, 2 boys who are wild but just amazing, a wonderful husband, lovely home, and it has given me everything, but I still do, because of the way I got there, because of the fact that I utilized an MAT, and I pushed myself to get off of the MAT probably before, like I had gotten off of it a couple of times, because of those pressures. You know what I mean? So I encourage people to like do what's best for you. you know, work with your doctor. Don't let social pressure like push you one way or the other with your medication. You may need to be on the medication for the rest of your life. You may not, but that's like, it's okay either way, you know?
And it's a tool in the toolbox of recovery. So I appreciate that you've talked about recovery capital, because you were building up those coping skills over the years, and you were developing, you know, a sense of self and a true sense of self. And that decision that you had to make of, do I go and buy stuff from the guy in Cleveland, or do I go to the MAT doctor? That decision quite frankly, probably saved your life, because we know what's in not only just heroin today, but also, marijuana. There are real risks, and overdoses is real, and people die every single day because of it. And being able to utilize medication-assisted treatment as part of your pathway is a completely and totally reasonable expectation of a disease. We have a disease, and people take medication when they have diseases. So, and being able to really take the appropriate dose, and that's where I think sometimes, there are people that do abuse the medication, and that's not sober. But being able to be on the right medication and the right dosage and taking it is complete.
It's recovery. It's recovery.
Right.
And it's just a part of recovery.
Right.
And a lot of times I don't blame people for not mentioning it, because who mentions what meds they're on?
Right.
Like, most people don't really talk about that.
Right.
Because it's a stigmatized space, I talk about it.
Right.
And there are so many more people that are in your recovery community who are on MAT that you probably don't even know about.
Right.
That, I think a lot of people, who stigmatize it would be shocked if more people were open about the MAT.
Right.
And that's why I choose to be open about it. Again, it's given me a lot, it's given me a lot of grief. And, I've faced a lot of pushback because of it, but I know that I've helped people because of it.
So in closing, if there's some words of wisdom that really spoke to you when you were having a tough day, either in early recovery or really throughout recovery, just something that, you've really always clung to that maybe could help somebody that's out there that's struggling.
Oh man. Well, really that whole, change the beliefs about you. Believe in yourself. Change your beliefs about yourself. Believe you are able, because you can. You can. I don't know, words of wisdom are so hard for me, because there's so many different things that resonate. I really love to take what you can use and leave the rest. Get the most out of whatever experience. And the challenges, I love this one. This has really helped me. All the things that are hard, the challenges, they're an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to grow.
Yes.
The worst days, right?
Yep. That's when the change happens. So that's for sure. So, well, thank you so much for coming out. Your story is just brilliant and beautiful, of being able to really show how that, addiction lives within so many different forms and so many different people, and that there really are different pathways, and being able to keep trying and finding different ways and finding what works for you, and being able to build upon. And you are proof that there's clearly a way out of active addiction into a beautiful life in recovery.
Aww,
so thank you so much.
Erin. Crying child, lock the door.